Can one country shut down one of the most important waterways on Earth? It sounds almost unbelievable. A narrow strip of sea between Iran and Oman carries a huge share of the world's oil and a significant share of liquefied natural gas. So when people ask, can one country close the Strait of Hormuz? They are really asking something much bigger. Can a single state choke off a vital artery of the global economy? The legal answer and the practical answer are not exactly the same. Under international law, the Strait of Hormuz is a strait used for international navigation, where the regime of transit passage applies. That means ships and aircraft of all states have a right to pass through it, and coastal states do not have a general legal right simply to close it. But here is the twist. Even if a country cannot lawfully close it in principle, it may still be able to disrupt it in practice, by force, threat, mines, missiles, drone attacks, seizures, or making insurance and commercial passage so risky that ships stop going through. That is why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much in world politics. The U.S. Energy Information Administration describes it as the world's most important oil transit choke point, and notes that if it were closed, available alternatives could move only part of the oil volumes that normally pass through it. So in this video, we are going to answer one big question. Can one country close the Strait of Hormuz? And to do that, we need to look at geography, international law, military reality, and the economics of fear. The Strait of Hormuz is the narrow maritime passage connecting the Persian Gulf with the Gulf of Oman and then the Arabian Sea. It lies between Iran to the north and Oman to the south, near Oman's Musandam Peninsula. Britannica notes that the strait is roughly 35 to 60 miles wide, but the traffic routes used by large vessels are much narrower and carefully organized. This is not just another shipping lane. It is one of the most strategically important choke points in the world. According to EIA, huge volumes of crude oil, petroleum products, and LNG pass through it, and UNCTAD has described it as a critical maritime choke point whose disruption affects energy markets, transport, and global supply chains. So when people ask whether one country can close it, they are not talking about a local fishing route. They are asking whether one country can interrupt a maritime corridor that matters to producers in the Gulf, consumers in Asia, and markets everywhere. This is where many people get confused. No, the Strait of Hormuz is not owned by one country in the ordinary sense. The bordering states are Iran and Oman, and the shipping lanes are located primarily in Omani territorial waters and partly in Iranian territorial waters. But these lanes are governed by international maritime law, not by the unchecked discretion of one coastal state. Britannica states this directly, and the U.S. State Department has also maintained that commercial and naval forces of maritime nations regularly exercise the right of transit passage through the Strait of Hormuz. So if the question is, does one country have a recognized legal right to seal it off because it borders the strait? The answer is no. The legal regime is more complicated than ordinary national control. This is the heart of the issue. Under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, straits used for international navigation are subject to the regime of transit passage. That regime exists because the international community recognized that some waterways are too important to global navigation to be treated like ordinary internal spaces. UNCLOS. Part 3 makes clear that transit passage applies in such straits and that ships and aircraft exercising that right must proceed without delay. The broader point is that the system is designed to preserve unimpeded navigation through international straits. That means a coastal state cannot just wake up one morning and say, "This strait is closed to the world because we feel like it." Legally, that is not how it works. The right of transit passage exists precisely to prevent one state from holding an international choke point hostage under normal circumstances. Now, lawyers will point out a nuance here. States sometimes dispute how these rules apply, or argue about reservations, security concerns, or the details of passage. But the mainstream legal view reflected in UNCLOS and maritime practice is that the Strait of Hormuz is not something one state can simply shut by unilateral legal declaration. So the legal answer is, one country cannot lawfully close the Strait of Hormuz in the ordinary sense. Then why do people still think one country can close it? Because the practical answer is different. A country may not have the legal right to close Hormuz, but it may still have the military ability to make passage dangerous. And in the real world, danger can matter almost as much as law. Think about it this way. A road may be legally open, but if it is covered with explosives, attacked by drones, patrolled by armed forces, and insurers will no longer cover vehicles using it, then for practical purposes, that road is no longer functioning normally. That is exactly why the Strait of Hormuz is such a serious issue. Even without a formally recognized closure, a country with enough proximity and military capability can make commercial traffic slow down, divert, or halt. EIA has recently noted that following regional military action, shipping traffic through the strait fell sharply because of the physical risk to vessels. UNTAID similarly reported that ship transits through the strait had come close to a halt during recent escalation, with ripple effects reaching well beyond the region. So the answer shifts. Legally, not really. Practically, under some conditions, yes, at least temporarily. The country most often mentioned is Iran. That is because Iran sits on the northern side of the strait, has a major nearby port at Bandar Abbas, and has long had naval and missile capabilities that could threaten shipping. Britannica notes Iran's strategic location and importance in any crisis involving Hormuz. The U.S. State Department has also specifically addressed Iranian maritime claims and reaffirmed the transit passage position of maritime powers. This does not mean Iran owns the strait. It means Iran is geographically positioned to affect it more than most countries could. Oman also borders the strait, but in most strategic discussions, Iran receives the greatest attention because of its military posture and history of tension in the region. So when people ask whether one country can close Hormuz, they are usually really asking, can Iran do it? And the best answer is, Iran likely cannot lawfully close it by right, but it can potentially disrupt it severely enough to create a de facto closure, at least for a period. This is a very important distinction. Close can mean at least three different things. First, it can mean a formal legal closure, a declaration that ships may not pass. That is the weakest meaning if it stands alone, because international law does not automatically accept it. Second, it can mean a military denial of access, using force or threat to stop ships from passing. Third, it can mean a commercial closure, where ships could theoretically pass, but owners, insurers, and crews decide the risk is too high. That third category is often overlooked, but it may be the most realistic. RUSI recently observed that a strait is functionally open only when war risk underwriters are willing to insure vessels at commercially viable rates. In other words, a waterway can be open on paper, but effectively closed in business reality. This is why the question is trickier than it seems. A state may fail to establish a perfectly sealed naval closure and still succeed in producing a functional shutdown. That is much harder. The geography and depth of the strait make it difficult for any country, including Iran, to disrupt shipping for a prolonged period. The shipping lanes are mostly in Omani waters. The strait is strategically vital to many states, and the international response to serious interference is likely to be strong. History also suggests that while shipping can be disrupted, sustained and uncontested closure is another matter. Britannica notes that the Strait of Hormuz has not been truly and permanently closed, although it has experienced serious disruption, including during the tanker war in the 1980s and more recent conflict. And then there is the geopolitical reality. Too many powerful countries have an interest in keeping the strait open. Gulf exporters need it. Asian importers depend on it. Major naval powers care about it. So even if one state causes a severe interruption, maintaining a long-term closure against determined international opposition is a very different challenge. So the honest answer is, one country might be able to disrupt or even effectively shut the strait for a time, but keeping it closed for a long period is much more difficult. Because the economic consequences are enormous. EIA says the Strait of Hormuz is the world's most important oil transit choke point. Around 1/5 of global LNG trade also passes through it, according to EIA, and UNCTAD has warned that disruption there affects not just oil, but shipping, supply chains, and broader trade flows. And here is the other key point. Alternatives exist, but only partially. EIA says that if the strait were closed, alternative routes could move only a portion of the oil volumes that normally transit Hormuz. That means a real disruption would not be easily absorbed. This is why even the fear of closure can send oil prices up. Markets do not wait for every tanker to stop moving. They react to risk, probability, and insurance pressure. So when people ask whether one country can close Hormuz, they are also asking whether one country can shake the world economy. And the answer is, it may not be able to control the whole outcome, but it can absolutely create global economic shock. Let's bring it all together. Can one country legally close the Strait of Hormuz? No, not in the normal legal sense. The strait is used for international navigation, and the regime of transit passage exists to preserve movement through such waterways. Can one country practically disrupt it? Yes. A coastal state with the right geography and military capability can make passage dangerous enough that shipping slows, stops, or becomes commercially unviable, at least temporarily. Can one country keep it closed for a long time? That is much harder. Geography, international law, naval opposition, and the interests of the global economy all work against a durable one-country closure. So the most accurate sentence is this: one country probably cannot lawfully or permanently close the Strait of Hormuz by itself, but it may be able to create a temporary de facto closure by making navigation too dangerous or too costly to continue normally. That is the real answer. Real. The Strait of Hormuz teaches us something important about power in the modern world. Power is not always about legal ownership. Sometimes it is about location. Sometimes it is about military reach. Sometimes it is about economics and fear. A country may not have the lawful authority to close a waterway, but if it can frighten shippers, raise insurance costs, threaten vessels, and create enough uncertainty, it can still bring the system close to a halt. And that is why the Strait of Hormuz matters so much. It is not just a line on the map. It is one of the places where international law, geopolitics, military strategy, and global energy all collide. Thank you for watching.